March 22nd, 1945. The air along the Rhine River smells of cordite and wet earth. A line of American jeeps kicks up dust on a narrow road barely 2 miles from the German-held East Bank. In the lead vehicle sits General George S. Patton, Jr., pearl-handled revolvers gleaming at his hips, ivory cane resting against his knee. His aide, Colonel Charles Codman, grips the dashboard as the jeep lurches forward. Ahead, the road curves into a forest where German positions were reported just hours ago. Codman leans close, voice tight with urgency. "Sir, you can't go there. Intelligence says enemy units are still in those woods." Patton doesn't turn his head. He stares ahead through his aviator sunglasses, jaw set like granite. "Then they'll have the honor of meeting me." The jeep accelerates. By March 1945, George S. Patton had become a legend, not just among his own Third Army troops, but within the German Wehrmacht itself. His name appeared in intercepted radio transmissions with a frequency that unnerved Allied intelligence officers. German commanders repositioned divisions based on rumors of where Patton might strike next. He had earned this reputation through 11 months of relentless offensive operations across France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and into the German heartland. But the reputation came with a dangerous edge. Patton believed in one principle above all others: a commander must be seen. Not behind desks, not in rear command posts, but forward, where the killing happened. The Third Army had been activated on August 1st, 1944, in the aftermath of Operation Cobra, the massive breakout from the Normandy hedgerows. While other Allied commanders consolidated gains and worried about supply lines, Patton unleashed his armor in a sweeping advance that devoured French territory at a pace not seen since the German Blitzkrieg of 1940. His tanks rolled across the Loire, liberated Chartres, and stormed toward the German border. Within weeks, the Third Army had advanced farther and faster than any American force in the European theater. Patton's doctrine was simple: bypass resistance, cut supply lines, exploit chaos, keep moving. Always moving. But this aggressive philosophy applied not only to his tanks. Patton drove himself forward with the same relentless energy. He routinely appeared at battalion command posts within artillery range of enemy positions. He walked through towns still smoking from house-to-house fighting. He crossed bridges his engineers had just finished repairing while German shells searched for the range. His staff officers developed ulcers trying to protect a man who seemed determined to die dramatically. Major General Hobart Gay, his chief of staff, once said that keeping Patton alive was harder than fighting the Germans. Patton's philosophy was rooted in history. He had studied every great captain from Alexander to Napoleon. He believed that soldiers fought harder when they knew their commander shared their risks. Modern warfare, with its radios and telephones, had created a distance between generals and battlefields. Patton despised this distance. He wanted his men to see him in their dust, hear his profanity in their ears, know that their general bled the same mud. This was not recklessness for its own sake. This was calculated psychology. When a tank crew spotted Patton's jeep rolling past their position toward enemy lines, they whispered to each other, "If the old man's up there, we can be too." By early 1945, the German army facing Patton was a shadow of the force that had conquered Europe. The Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's desperate winter counteroffensive in the Ardennes, had failed bloodily. German divisions were understrength, exhausted, and increasingly composed of teenagers and old men scraped from the bottom of the Reich's manpower reserves. Officers who had survived years of Eastern Front brutality now faced a different kind of terror. American industrial firepower combined with commanders who refused to fight by predictable rules. And no commander was less predictable than Patton.
German intelligence files on Patton were thick with contradictions. They knew he was impulsive, profane, and obsessed with speed. They knew he believed in reincarnation and claimed to have fought in ancient battles. They knew his Third Army could cover 50 miles in a day when logistics said 20 was optimistic. But they also knew something else, something that made him particularly dangerous. Patton took the war personally. Other American generals fought with cold professionalism. Patton fought with fury. He insulted the enemy in press conferences, promised to urinate in the Rhine, and spoke of killing Germans with the enthusiasm of a man discussing his favorite sport. This made him easy to mock. It also made him terrifying. Wehrmacht commanders debated endlessly how to counter the Third Army. Some argued for mobile defense, others for fortified lines. The problem was that Patton ignored conventional military logic. He attacked when he should have consolidated. He advanced when supply lines were overstretched. He turned defense into offense with bewildering speed. During the Battle of the Bulge, when German forces had nearly broken through American lines, Patton pivoted his entire army 90 degrees north and attacked into the German flank within 72 hours, a maneuver most planners said would take a week. German officers captured after that battle spoke with genuine disbelief. How had he moved so fast? How had he known where to strike? The answer was simpler than they imagined. Patton knew because he was there. While other army commanders studied maps in heated headquarters, Patton drove to the front daily. He questioned lieutenants in foxholes. He watched terrain with his own eyes. He smelled where the enemy was weakest. His staff called these excursions reconnaissance. His superiors called them suicide missions. Patton called them essential. By March 1945, as the Allies closed on the Rhine River, Germany's last major natural barrier, Patton's habit of personal reconnaissance had intensified. The war was ending. History was being written. And George Patton intended to write himself into it with actions, not from behind a desk. His immediate superior, General Omar Bradley, had issued multiple orders attempting to restrict Patton's forward movements. Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower had personally warned him that losing an army commander to a sniper or random artillery shell would be catastrophic for morale. Patton agreed politely in headquarters. Then he climbed into his jeep and drove toward the guns. His aides learned to accept the inevitable. When Patton said he wanted to see the situation personally, it meant they would be spending the afternoon in range of German machine guns. George Patton did not believe he would die in this war, not from any rational assessment of odds, but from something deeper, a conviction bordering on mysticism. He spoke often of past lives, of dying in battles centuries ago, of knowing terrain he had never visited because he had been there before. To Patton, this war was not his first, and death would not be his last experience of combat. This belief freed him from the caution that paralyzed other men. When shells screamed overhead, Patton felt alive. When bullets cracked past, he felt confirmed in his purpose. His staff psychiatrists, yes, the Army quietly assigned them to monitor him, noted symptoms consistent with what we might now call narcissistic personality disorder mixed with genuine courage. But diagnosis missed the point. Patton needed to be seen because he needed to exist. A general invisible to his troops was not a general at all. He was a bureaucrat, and Patton would rather die than be a bureaucrat. Colonel Charles Codman kept a flask of bourbon in his jacket, specifically for days when Patton decided to tour active combat zones. Major Alexander Stiller, Patton's personal aide, developed a nervous tic in his left eye that worsened whenever the general reached for his map case and said, "Let's go see what's happening up front." These men were not cowards. They were experienced officers who understood that their primary mission was not killing Germans, but keeping Patton alive long enough to kill Germans. It was an impossible task. Patton dismissed security details as nursemaids. He refused to use armored vehicles, preferring open jeeps because soldiers need to see their commander's face. His aides learned to position themselves as human shields without being obvious about it. They coordinated with forward units to accidentally have extra troops in areas where Patton planned to visit. They lied to him about road conditions, claimed bridges were out when they were intact, anything to keep him 500 yards further from German lines. It rarely worked. There was a calculated madness to Patton's exposure. When a battalion stalled before a German strongpoint, uncertain whether to assault or wait for artillery, Patton's arrival changed the equation instantly. He would stand in plain view, sometimes on the hood of his jeep, binoculars scanning enemy positions while his men watched in disbelief. The message was clear without words. If the old man with the ivory-handled pistols isn't afraid, what excuse do you have? Tank crews preparing to advance would see Patton's jeep racing past them toward the objective. Infantry officers radioing for permission to withdraw would spot that distinctive figure in the polished helmet walking their trench line. Morale was not an abstract concept in these moments. It was kinetic. Patton's physical presence converted hesitation into aggression. His Third Army had the highest advance rate and the lowest rate of combat exhaustion cases in the European theater. Coincidence? His staff didn't think so. German intelligence officers faced a peculiar dilemma regarding Patton. They knew his habits. Intercepted American radio traffic occasionally revealed his location. Reconnaissance units reported sightings of his distinctive command vehicle near frontline positions. This created opportunities. A well-placed sniper, a mortar team with good coordinates, an artillery battery catching him on an exposed road. Killing Patton would be a propaganda victory of immense proportions. It might slow the American advance for weeks while command structures reorganized. Yet orders to specifically target Patton never materialized with the urgency one might expect. Why? Some German officers later admitted a strange psychological calculation. Patton was predictable in his aggression. Other American commanders were cautious, methodical. If Patton died, he might be replaced by someone more careful, someone harder to anticipate. Better the devil you know. There was also the warrior's respect. Patton fought like a Prussian, like the old tales of Frederick the Great leading cavalry charges. Even enemies could admire that, even as they tried to kill him. Military academies in 1945 taught staff work, logistics, combined arms coordination, the science of industrial warfare. Patton had mastered these subjects, but he believed something essential was being lost. Ancient commanders led from the front because there was no other way to lead. Caesar crossed the Rubicon with his legions. Alexander charged with his companion cavalry. Hannibal stood in the battle line at Cannae. Modern technology, radios, telephones, reconnaissance aircraft, allowed generals to command from safety. Patton saw this as corruption of leadership's essence. He told his staff that soldiers would follow orders from a distant voice on a radio, but they would die for a man they had seen standing in the fire with them. His critics called this theatrical. His defenders called it timeless. The truth was probably both. Patton was performing, but the performance was real. He genuinely believed that a commander's place was with his troops, and he was willing to die proving it. Patton knew the statistics. In World War I, generals died at far lower rates than their men, tucked safely in chateaux miles behind the lines. This had bred contempt, bitterness, the poetry of Wilfred Owen and Siegfried Sassoon. But earlier wars told different stories. The American Civil War killed 6 Confederate generals in a single battle at Franklin. Stonewall Jackson died from friendly fire while scouting forward positions. British General Gordon perished on the steps of Khartoum. These men became legends precisely because they died leading. Patton collected these stories like talismans. He spoke of them often, especially late at night, over whiskey with his inner circle. He wanted that kind of death if death came, forward, visible, blade in hand. His staff worried he wanted it too much. There was courage, and then there was the secret wish for glorious ending, which drove Patton, even he might not have known. March 22nd, 1945, afternoon. The Rhine River crossing operation had been Patton's obsession for weeks. While British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery prepared his elaborate set-piece assault to the north, complete with airborne divisions, artillery barrages timed to the minute, and massive logistical buildup, Patton seethed with impatience. Montgomery's crossing was scheduled for March 24th. Patton intended to beat him. On the night of March 22nd, elements of the 5th Infantry Division crossed the Rhine at Oppenheim in assault boats, meeting surprisingly light resistance. By dawn, they had established a bridgehead. Patton received the news at his headquarters in a commandeered German house. He smiled, made a single phone call to Bradley, "We're across," and immediately ordered his staff to prepare to move forward. Colonel Codman recognized the look in Patton's eyes. It was the look that preceded bad decisions. "Sir, the bridgehead is still being consolidated. German counterattacks are expected. Perhaps tomorrow would be." Patton cut him off with a gesture. "I'm going to piss in the Rhine." He said it matter-of-factly, as if announcing lunch plans. Codman exchanged glances with Major Stiller. Both men understood this was not negotiable. They also understood that piss in the Rhine was not metaphorical. Patton genuinely intended to urinate in Germany's most sacred river as a symbolic gesture. Within 30 minutes, a convoy of 3 jeeps was racing toward Oppenheim. The road to the river passed through recently captured villages where fires still smoldered. American engineers worked frantically on a pontoon bridge, while German artillery searched for their range. Shells burst in the water, sending geysers 40 feet high. Patton's jeep did not slow. It accelerated. His driver, Sergeant John Mims, had learned long ago not to question orders, no matter how insane. They reached the western bank, where infantrymen crouched in hastily dug positions. The soldiers stared as Patton climbed out of his jeep, adjusted his pistols, and walked calmly to the riverbank. He unzipped his trousers and urinated into the Rhine while German machine gun fire chattered in the distance. An officer with a camera captured the moment. Patton zipped up, turned, and grinned. I've waited a long time to do that. But pissing in the river was not enough. Patton pointed across to the eastern bank, where the bridgehead struggled to expand. I want to see it. I want to walk on German soil. Codman's voice rose slightly. Sir, we don't have full control of the east bank. There are still German positions within a quarter-mile of the crossing point. They have direct observation. Patton was already walking toward the pontoon bridge. Engineers stopped working to salute. Patton returned the salute without breaking stride. His boots hit the swaying pontoon sections. The bridge bounced with each step. Artillery shells continued to probe the area. Explosions walking up and down the river in a pattern that suggested German forward observers were very much active and very much aware something important was happening. Codman and Stiller followed because there was no alternative. Abandoning Patton was not an option. Getting him killed was career-ending. Keeping up was all they could do. The bridge seemed to stretch forever, each pontoon section a separate eternity. Water splashed over the sides. The smell of cordite mixed with river mud. Halfway across, a shell landed 200 yards upstream. Then another, closer. The Germans were bracketing the bridge. Standard artillery procedure. One round over, one round short. Then split the difference and destroy the target. Patton did not duck. He did not hurry. He walked at the same measured pace, as if touring a garden. They reached the eastern bank as another shell screamed overhead, impacting in the town behind them. Patton stepped onto German soil and immediately bent down. Codman watched in confusion as the general scooped up a handful of dirt and let it fall through his fingers. Then Patton straightened, brushed off his hands, and smiled. Thus William the Conqueror, he said quietly. It took Codman a moment to understand. William had stumbled on the beach at Hastings in 1066, and when his men panicked at the bad omen, he grabbed English soil and proclaimed he had seized the land. Patton had just reenacted the moment, on a contested riverbank, under German artillery fire, because history mattered to him even in the middle of battle. An infantry captain ran toward them, crouching low. General Patton? Sir, you shouldn't be here. We've got German observers in that tree line. He pointed northeast toward a dark stand of pines about 800 yards away. They've been calling in fire missions all morning. We're trying to clear them out, but Patton looked toward the trees through his binoculars. Have you sent patrols? The captain hesitated. Sir, we're still establishing defensive positions. Battalion wants us to consolidate before. Patton lowered the binoculars. His voice dropped to the quiet tone his staff knew meant danger. Captain, you're in Germany. There is no consolidating. There is only forward. Get patrols into those woods within the hour. The captain saluted and ran back toward his command post. Codman seized the moment. Sir, you've crossed the Rhine. You've stood on German soil. The photograph will be historic. We should return to headquarters so you can... Patton wasn't listening. He was walking along the riverbank, examining the terrain, occasionally stopping to look through his binoculars. A squad of infantry shadowed him nervously, unsure whether they were protecting the general or being protected by him. Stiller moved close to Codman. He's going to get us all killed. Codman nodded. Yes, but history will say we died well. Then the moment came that would be retold in 3rd Army barracks for decades. Patton's path took him toward a farmhouse on the eastern edge of the bridgehead. The building showed damage from the initial assault. Walls pockmarked with bullet holes. Part of the roof collapsed. American soldiers had cleared it hours earlier, but it sat at the absolute forward edge of the captured zone. Beyond it, only 300 yards away, was a stone barn that intelligence reported as a possible German observation post. Patton walked toward the farmhouse. A young lieutenant stepped into his path. The man's hand shook slightly. General, sir, you can't go there. That area isn't secure. We haven't cleared beyond that building and Patton stopped. He looked at the lieutenant for a long moment. The young officer held his ground despite the fear visible in his eyes. Finally, Patton spoke. "What's your name, Lieutenant?" The officer straightened. "Weaver, sir. Robert Weaver, 2nd Platoon, Able Company." Patton nodded slowly. "Lieutenant Weaver, I appreciate your concern for my safety, but I'm going to that farmhouse because I need to see what the enemy can see from that barn. Now you have two choices. You can stand here and watch me go alone, or you can come with me and show me you're the kind of officer who doesn't let his general walk into danger without support." The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then Weaver swallowed hard. "I'll come with you, sir." They crossed the open ground together. Patton, Weaver, Codman, Stiller, and 4 enlisted men who materialized from nearby positions without being ordered. The 100 yards felt like miles. Every step expected the crack of sniper rifle or the whistle of incoming mortar rounds. They reached the farmhouse and pressed against the wall. Patton moved to a shattered window and raised his binoculars toward the barn. He studied it for 30 seconds that felt like hours. Then he lowered the glasses. "That barn is occupied. I can see movement through the gaps in the walls. Mark it for artillery." He turned to Weaver. "Good work, Lieutenant. Your men should be proud to serve under you." As they moved back toward the pontoon bridge, Codman finally allowed himself to breathe. They had survived another of Patton's excursions. But as they reached the bridge, a single rifle shot cracked from the direction of the barn. The bullet struck a wooden post 5 feet from where Patton stood. The general didn't flinch. He turned, looked back toward the barn, and smiled. They missed. Then he walked onto the pontoon bridge and crossed back to the western bank as if returning from an evening stroll. Within hours, the story spread through the Third Army like electricity through wire. Patton had crossed the Rhine under fire. Patton had walked German soil while artillery searched for him. Patton had stood at the forward edge of the bridgehead and drawn enemy fire without flinching. The details grew with each retelling, as war stories do, but the core remained factual enough to inspire and terrify in equal measure. Soldiers who had never seen their commanding general suddenly felt connected to him. He wasn't a distant authority issuing orders from safety. He was out there, closer to the enemy than some frontline troops. Morale, already high from the successful crossing, surged to something approaching euphoria. The photograph of Patton urinating in the Rhine reached newspapers within days, though editors carefully cropped it to show only his back and the river. The image became iconic. American defiance literally pissing on Nazi Germany's greatest natural barrier. Patton loved it. He ordered copies and signed them for his staff with inscriptions like "The Pause That Refreshes" and "Making History, One Stream at a Time." His sense of humor about his own mythology was part of what made him simultaneously insufferable and beloved. General Omar Bradley's reaction was less enthusiastic. When he learned the full details of Patton's Rhine adventure, he called Third Army headquarters. The conversation was brief and one-sided. Bradley's voice, normally calm, carried an edge of genuine anger. "George, you commanded an entire army. If a German sniper had put a bullet through your skull on that riverbank, the military consequences would have been significant. The political consequences would have been catastrophic. Eisenhower already thinks you're a liability. Stunts like this don't help." Patton's response was characteristically unapologetic. "Brad, I crossed the Rhine a full 2 days before Montgomery's three-ring circus. That's what matters. That's what the newspapers will remember. And my men will remember their general stood with them on German soil while the fighting was still hot." Bradley couldn't argue with results. The Third Army bridgehead at Oppenheim expanded rapidly. German counterattacks, expected and feared, never materialized with significant force. Wehrmacht units in the area were disorganized, exhausted, and increasingly convinced the war was lost. Patton's aggressive exploitation of the crossing pushed deep into Germany within days. His tanks rolled eastward while other Allied armies were still consolidating their own Rhine crossings. The race across Germany had begun, and Patton intended to win it. But within Third Army headquarters, the staff officers who had accompanied Patton to the Rhine processed the experience differently. Colonel Codman wrote in his private journal that night, "The general has no fear of death. I'm not certain this is courage. Courage requires acknowledging danger and choosing to face it anyway." Patton doesn't acknowledge danger. He doesn't see it, or he sees it and finds it irrelevant. This makes him impossible to protect and exhausting to follow. But God help me, I would follow him into hell if he asked. Major Stiller said nothing publicly, but his hands shook for 2 days afterward. The nervous tick in his eye became permanent. German intelligence reports from late March 1945 reveal a fascinating portrait of confusion. Multiple Wehrmacht units filed reports about Patton sightings near active combat zones. Some reports were accurate. Others were paranoid fabrications. The cumulative effect was a German command structure that believed Patton was simultaneously in multiple locations, personally directing operations across hundreds of miles of front. This wasn't entirely wrong. Patton covered immense distances daily, appearing unexpectedly at forward positions from Bavaria to Thuringia. But the German tendency to see Patton everywhere, he wasn't created a psychological effect beyond his actual presence. He became a ghost haunting their collapsing lines. One captured German officer, interrogated in early April, provided insight into enemy thinking. Major Friedrich Weber, a battalion commander in the 6th SS Mountain Division, described the moment his unit received intelligence that Patton's Third Army was approaching their sector. "We knew what it meant," Weber said. "Other American generals you could predict. They would consolidate, bring up supplies, prepare methodically. Patton would hit you before you finished digging your foxholes. And he would be there, personally. We heard stories from other units. He drove to the front like a madman. Some of our snipers had opportunities to kill him and didn't take them. Not from mercy. From fear that killing such a man would bring worse luck than letting him live. It sounds superstitious, I know, but you didn't see him. We did. He fought like he was possessed. The incident at the Rhine was not Patton's last brush with death that spring. On April 9th, he flew in a reconnaissance aircraft over German positions near Erfurt. Anti-aircraft fire damaged the plane, forcing an emergency landing in contested territory. Patton walked away from the smoking aircraft and hitched a ride back to headquarters in a passing supply truck. On April 14th, he visited a newly captured concentration camp at Ohrdruf and witnessed horrors that shook even his battle-hardened composure. He ordered every available soldier and German civilian to tour the camp, believing people needed to see the evidence of Nazi atrocities with their own eyes. That same afternoon, he drove to forward positions despite being visibly disturbed by what he'd witnessed at Ohrdruf. His need to be at the front intensified rather than diminished as the war entered its final weeks. General Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, faced a delicate problem. Patton was invaluable. The Third Army's advance into Germany was spectacular by any measure, covering more ground, capturing more prisoners, suffering fewer casualties than comparable units. But Patton's disregard for his own safety created constant anxiety at SHEF headquarters. If Patton died stupidly from avoidable exposure to enemy fire, it would be a propaganda disaster. Eisenhower couldn't relieve Patton without justification that would satisfy Washington and public opinion. He couldn't order Patton to stay safe because Patton would ignore such orders. The solution was informal pressure through Bradley and quiet word with Patton's staff to keep an eye on him. Everyone understood this was futile, but the appearance of control mattered. By late April 1945, as Germany collapsed and Hitler's suicide became known, Patton's forward reconnaissance missions took on a different character. He was no longer just fighting. He was touring a conquered empire. He visited Berchtesgaden, Hitler's mountain retreat, and sat in the Führer's chair. He entered liberated areas of Czechoslovakia despite orders restricting how far east he could advance. Political considerations, the agreed-upon boundaries with Soviet forces, meant nothing to Patton. He wanted to keep going, to drive to Berlin, to beat the Soviets to Prague. When ordered to halt and pull back, he complied with visible reluctance and private fury. The war ended on May 8, 1945. Patton had survived every reckless decision, every forward patrol, every moment of unnecessary exposure. Luck, fate, or providence, whatever force had protected him throughout the war, held until the final day. His staff relaxed for the first time in a year. Surely now, with fighting finished, Patton would behave more cautiously. They were wrong. In the months of occupation duty that followed, Patton continued his pattern of personal inspection tours, driving through unstable regions where displaced persons, former SS soldiers, and Soviet patrols created unpredictable dangers. On December 9, 1945, his staff car collided with an American truck near Mannheim. Patton suffered severe neck and spine injuries. He died 12 days later without ever walking again. The irony was not lost on those who knew him. He had survived countless brushes with enemy fire only to die in a traffic accident. Some said it was fitting. Patton's war ended not with glory, but with absurdity. Others insisted there was nothing absurd about it. Patton had always believed he would die in uniform, in the land he had conquered. And so he had. History remembers generals in two ways, by what they accomplished and by how they led. Patton's accomplishments are documented in maps showing the Third Army's relentless advance across Europe, in casualty statistics favoring his forces, in the speed with which Nazi Germany crumbled before his tanks. But his leadership, that walking into fire, that refusal to command from safety, that need to be seen bleeding the same mud as his soldiers, remains more complicated to assess. Modern military doctrine would classify much of Patton's behavior as reckless endangerment of command structure. No contemporary general would be permitted such personal exposure. Yet something essential was transmitted through those reckless moments. His soldiers didn't just follow orders. They believed. They believed their general would never ask them to go where he wouldn't go first. That belief converted ordinary men into an army that covered more ground and broke more enemy formations than anyone thought possible. Patton proved that leadership, at its core, remains an ancient art. You can command from a bunker with radios and computers, but to truly lead, you must stand in the fire and show others it can be endured. Whether that wisdom justifies the risk remains a question each generation of warriors must answer for themselves. Patton answered with his boots in German mud and his eyes on the enemy. History hasn't stopped arguing about whether he was right.